Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Living Streams podcast. I'm Brandon, and today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Ryan Romeo. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course, man. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I knew that you'd be on, and I just couldn't decide which topic to discuss with you, but you kind of chose that for me by preaching yesterday. So
here it is.
Yeah, yesterday you spoke on the topic of rest as kind of the way to culminate this conversation we've been having during the Other Hours series.
Yeah.
And you titled your sermon Counterfeit Rest, is that right?
That's right. Counterfeit Rest. Yeah.
Okay.
And really, I mean, for me, you know, the original title was Rest in the Digital Age, which is a very David Stockton title. And I was chewing on that, you know, like what does it look like to rest right now in terms of what society is dealing with right now. And as I was going through it, I started to realize you're pouring into numbers about, you know, Netflix and how much time we spend on our phone. And I started to get real introspective and go, when I want to rest, I lay on the couch and open up Netflix or open up Instagram or whatever. And it is not as restful as I thought. And I started to realize this is more of a distraction than it is rest, you know. So that was really what fueled, you know, yesterday when we were diving into it. So
totally. Yeah. And you brought up some amazing points. I mean, at one point you did make the joke, this is starting to feel a little bit like a TED Talk because of all the information that you brought to the table.
Yeah.
But I would love to dive in a little bit deeper on some of the topics you addressed yesterday about how technology affects the way that we rest. And I think you brought up a great point that I thought was just fantastic. It's so much harder to actually achieve deep rest in the 21st century, I think, than it ever has been, which is super counterintuitive because technically speaking, we do have more time off. We have more leisure time than we've ever had before in history. And yet people feel so burnt out all the time. Why is that?
It's true. And it's funny, I was going over stats and we have way more free time than ever before in history.
Yeah.
And yet you talk to everybody and it's like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm stressed and I'm anxietal and everybody's feeling this like constant busyness, you know? And I joked yesterday, everybody goes on vacation and they come back and they say the same thing.
Totally.
I need a vacation from my vacation. They come back and they're still not rested. And what I was really diving into yesterday was the fact that we just spend so much time on our phones, on our computers, watching TV. And we think that that's restful, but it's not. It's not doing it. So some of the stats I was talking about, like we open our phone 110 times a day, you know. So bam, 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 bam. And I believe it. I'm like, I'm sure I've opened it more times than that on a day, you know, especially I'm on tour or something like you're in a place where you have a lot of free time. You're going to be opening your phone a lot. And you spend about 4 hours a day realistically on your phone. Statistically, that's what people are spending on their phone. And when I was diving into some of the numbers with college students, it was like a lot of them spend more time on their phone than they spend sleeping.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, which is crazy. And so you go, all right, we're all feeling tired. And we, you know, I'm sure you can attest to this. You feel like, oh, I want to rest. I'll watch Netflix or I'll open up my phone. But it's not working. People are still exhausted. And that was the thing I kept coming back to, going, okay, this is not real rest. Like this is, there's something else and Jesus is talking about it in Matthew 11 saying, I will give you real rest. I think those of us, even in the Christian world, we're not walking in real rest. And not that I had a full prescription yesterday on what real rest looks like. I've got a few points, but I'm exploring that too as I'm interacting with this sort of technology.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. And honestly, your sermon hit home for a lot of people. I've been talking to people all this entire morning and yesterday afternoon, they're saying like, I really need to spend some more time away from my phone. I don't even realize how much time it's consuming.
Yes.
And so it was so funny yesterday after church, my wife and I were driving home and she's like, I think I want to stop by Target and get an alarm clock. I think I need to turn off the phone and leave it in the other room because you don't realize how much time you spend just like looking at your phone and especially for those of us who have like smartwatches and stuff like that, like you're constantly just getting notification after notification after notification.
And what's funny is like it's not evil. Like I said yesterday, like your phone's not evil. It's just new. Like in terms of history, the technology that we have right now is a tiny blip on the radar. You know, So we're like collectively children looking at this technology going, how does it affect us? I talked to Don Wooster after service yesterday, and he said, I have Life magazines from the 1930s, and in there it says 3 out of 5 doctors recommend smoking unfiltered Camels, And it's not that they were bad people or, they just didn't understand the science hadn't caught up with where they were at. And we're in the same way. Science hasn't fully caught up with where we are technologically. And we have to be able to say, obviously we're doing a video podcast and we love technology. We love Instagram. We use all that stuff. All of those tools are so good. So it drives me crazy when people say all of technology is evil or all social media is evil or that it's not real. And I'm like,
exactly.
No, it's real. Social media for sure makes a real impact on people's lives. But at the same time, when we're looking at ourselves and we're being introspective and we have moments where we could take a step back and go, we have to be really careful with this too. Like this is a tool that is just that. It's a tool.
Yeah.
It's not everything in life. And we have to be really careful with the time we spend with it.
Right. And I think that, that's the point, is that this technology we have is so brand new. I've heard statistics that we have more information available to us in the last 20 years than the sum of human history combined.
Yes.
And it's amazing the access that we have, but I don't think that we've quite figured out what to do with the information that we have or the way that we access it. And I think yesterday you brought up a really good point that we've just gone through in the last 20, 25 years, the biggest step forward as far as communication that we've experienced in 500 years.
Yeah.
And we haven't quite seen the full effect of what that honestly means. Yeah. And I think that's the point, is that in the church specifically, you have two different views. You have people that are like the ones who are going all in saying, yes, technology is amazing, we're just going to go full into it.
Yes.
Or like we're scared to death and we're going to stay as far away from this as possible.
Yeah.
How do you strike that middle ground of using technology but understanding that it's a tool, it's not an end in and of itself?
Well, there's two things. One thing in life, I love tension, and you and I have talked about that all the time.
Yeah, totally.
I never like when the church is like, this is how you solve that problem. Done. Check it off. It's a very complicated issue in life. Right. So there are some people that are so addicted that they need to cut out social media. And I talked to a guy yesterday who's like, I got rid of all my social media apps. Yeah. I'm like, I just realized I need to get away from it. And the comparison, like we were talking about, like comparing yourself to the highlight reel of other people's lives. Right. There are people that dive into that and it causes real emotional stress in their life and they need to fully cut it out. There's other people that I think can walk that line a little bit more. And for me, I think the best way that I've learned how to do it is trying to take digital Sabbath. Okay. And so I said this yesterday, and I'm not the best at it, and I've skipped Saturdays before, but for the most part, I try to take Saturday and turn my phone off completely and say I'm not gonna interact at all with it. Because I know myself, if I leave it on my kitchen countertop and it dings, I'm gonna run over there and go, ah. And I know that Saturdays are my day that I'm like, I have to make sure Friday I take care of all the work that I can. It's a day off. Friday's a day off at church, but I'm still working on my podcast or tour or book or whatever. And so Fridays I'm working really hard on that stuff and trying to wrap everything up so that Saturday I could shut my phone off. Yeah. And I've read about people who do an hour a day. They shut off their phone in the morning. Yesterday too, the tension of having the Bible on your phone. Yeah. Sometimes I've realized recently, hey, this is actually a problem for me. It's really great. It's very convenient. But I think I should probably go back to the good old fashioned, dust off my paper Bible and sit down and start reading it. There's just that kind of ebb and flow in life, and you have to be self-aware enough to go, I think I'm slipping down a bad path. And understanding, like we talked about yesterday, the science of it, understanding when you get a notification, that's addicting. It's that that shot of dopamine, and you have to be so careful with that. So even for me, turning off all notifications on my phone, other than text, which is the point of text, but email notifications, everything else, I've turned off all of that, because I don't want that constant dinging and that constant like feedback of somebody's trying to get in touch with you. So that, those are a couple things I do. So.
Yeah, totally. And this is a conversation we've been having for a long time,
yes.
Especially considering that I'm overseeing our online campus development and this whole thing.
Yes.
And then you and I both have backgrounds in communications. And so it's something that we're always talking about, like, how do you use the medium in order to preserve the message that you want to portray?
Yes.
And I think something we talked a ton about when I was in undergrad was talking about the idea of medium theory and how the medium that you use to communicate affects you. I know Marshall McLuhan's got that great line where he's like, medium is message, you know what I mean? And
yes.
I don't know if I go that far, you know what I mean?
Yes.
But there was an analogy I heard in school that I think was really good, and it was the tools that we use, they end up shaping us.
For sure.
And like you think about like somebody who's digging a hole, the tool that the person's using is affecting what they're doing, but it's also affecting them. You end up with calluses and blisters
yes.
and all that kind of stuff. And so you using a specific tool, ultimately, it does affect you.
Yes.
And I think that we haven't quite grappled with that reality that this new technology that we're using all the time, it is affecting us. And you talked about yesterday, you talked about anxiety. And I think that it would be good to dive a little bit deeper into that and how technology relates to the increase in anxiety we see in this generation.
For sure. I think, this is a great example of that, where the medium that we're using to communicate really does start affecting us. And I read this research because I'm in the middle of writing my next book and I'm wrapping it up. And there's a section in there I wrote called The Noise. Yeah. And it really is talking about the noise that's constantly coming at us. And I said the real problem with the noise is not that it communicates lies to you or anything else. And I'm talking about pursuing dreams that God gave you. Problem with the noise is that it just tells you to do it later, or that you're too tired, and you just kind of keep pushing things off that you should be diving into. And part of the research I was doing with that book, I dove into this study in the University of Sussex where they were looking at the effects of multitasking on your brain. Yeah. And really on your phone, that's what you're doing. You're multitasking. You're jumping from Instagram to Twitter to text message to anything. I mean, I was telling that story yesterday of like all of a sudden I found myself looking at survival bunkers on Pinterest when I started off, on Instagram, and there was like 18 steps between those two. And what my brain was doing was constantly firing on a bunch of different subjects. And the study in the University of Sussex said that what happens when you're multitasking is that you're just getting shallow, like you're just diving into these things in a very shallow way. And what you're doing is you're actually operating off of gut instinct, which is more of the emotional center of your brain. So you're just going like real quick, like here's my thought on that subject, here's my thought on that subject, here's my thought on that subject. And the study found that when you're doing a lot of multitasking, especially with media, it starts to affect the density of your gray brain matter, which is like frightening. And they said it makes your gray brain matter more porous, which means the more we're multitasking and getting into these like really, like we're just operating off of the emotional center of our brain, the less we are able to actually get into deep thought anymore. So our ability to have conversation, our ability to do this gets harder and harder and harder because we just can't dive into one idea for that long. And the other thing that they found is when you're operating off of that emotional center of your brain, it lights that part of your brain up a lot more. And so when you're operating out of emotions a lot more, things like anxiety spike. Things like anger spike because you're just so used to operating out of gut instinct and you're just really aware of emotions. And that, as a society, we have to take a step back and go, okay, like this thing in my hand is addictive and I'm staring at it all the time and it's affecting my brain. And I need to be able to put those together and go, okay, this is a beautiful tool, but it's a tool that I have to put boundary conditions around in my life. Nobody's going to do that for you. You're the one that has to say, okay, I have a problem right now and I need to pause. And I think it's huge. And the other thing I think when you were saying it affects, like the medium affects what we're doing, for a church, what's so interesting for me is I realize now, especially with running the Proverbs daily, like people respond to quicker and quicker ideas. So you can't say 2 sentences anymore. That's way too long for people. Like you have to get everything down into the shortest sentence possible. Like 5 words is the best, And it's really made me a little bit like I've analyzed culture a lot based on that. And I think looking at our sermons and everything else, we relate to sermons now based on a 10-second chunk. Like, what did, Elevation say this year or this week, or, Stephen Furtick say this week, or whatever? Like, can we boil it down into a very, very short chunk? And it's because we have that attention span problem. We have that problem where it's affecting our brain to the point where we're like, we can't dive into theology. We don't have time to actually hear a story from someone. Yeah. We just need that like quick sentence to go, yeah, I like it, or no, I don't like it. So it does. It's a medium that affects our message in a big way.
Yeah.
So,
and when you're operating at that intensely high level of stimulation all the time, it's incredibly hard to come down to a place of actual genuine rest. Yeah. And I think that's where it connects, into this topic of Sabbath, is because even when you're Sabbathing, and this is something that I found, I don't feel rested after most of the time. And I think this last weekend, I really tried to like disconnect as much as I possibly could. And especially after last week's podcast, I was talking with Mark and Alec, and they're talking about how they're taking 24 hours to actually completely disconnect from the outside world and really just begin to dive into encountering the presence of God and allowing the space for that. And I think like what you say with the Bible app is a great point because it's an easy shortcut for us. You know what I mean? I oftentimes am reading the Bible on YouVersion, and which is awesome. It's great for being on the go. But then the text message comes up, and it's like, oh, I can respond to that really quickly. And then the next thing you know is like, what was I reading again? Was I praying? I don't remember. And I think that's the point, is that we're not able to ever disengage enough to finally find that place of quiet. And I think, I mean, the Bible's so full of examples where Jesus himself in the day and age where he lived, which was obviously a lot more quiet than it is today, he would still escape and go off into a secluded place where he can encounter the Father. And that's something that I think is even more difficult for us today.
For sure. And it's so important. I was talking about yesterday, like we see Jesus leave the group and go spend some time alone with the Father because he needed to do that. The problem with us is we leave everybody, but when we bring our phone with us, we're bringing everybody with us. So you're just bringing all those distractions with you. And seeing what Jesus modeled getting away, it's funny, I was reading all this research, and this lady who is not Christian at all, but she's like, all this research is pointing to if you spend 24 hours completely disconnected from any technology, that it helps your brain reset, and it helps you get back to healthy emotional states and stuff like that. And as if it's some new idea. And I'm like, no, it's not a new idea. Like, it's all the way back in Genesis. Like, take that day and disconnect and rest. And I think that's where I started talking about like counterfeit rest, because we think, oh, I'm going to take 24 hours and I'm going to rest and I'm going to binge watch Netflix and I'm going to pull open, whatever. And no, that does not actually help you at all. And you need to give your brain a rest from that multitasking. And I love, like, we take the 24 hours and engaging with life. Like, it's so funny how we just get this fog over our eyes. Like, I am so in my head right now because I'm like thinking about so many different things that I'm just not even engaged in life.
Right.
And I was telling someone yesterday, I said, I've been getting more in the habit. Like, my daughter will come to me and she'll be talking, May is 6-year-old, like, rambling state, And I'm staring at her face, and like 5 minutes in, I realize I don't know what she's saying. And I have to like stop and be like, I get down on my knees. I go, sweetie, I'm sorry. Daddy was a little distracted. What were you just saying? Can you take it a step back? And trying to like engage back with life. And taking 24 hours, spending time in the presence of God is huge, huge, huge. And I think that what dovetails with that, though, and plays along with that, is getting back to engaging with the people that we love in our lives too, like getting back to paying attention to our wife, paying attention to our kids, and understanding that the way that we live right now is not conducive to being present with real life. And we have to force ourselves and be, like I said, self-aware enough to go, I am not engaging with real life right now. I need to set that aside, pause, and go, okay, sweetie, what were you saying again? So
totally. Yeah, I noticed a couple years ago how technology was affecting me and how much I was on social media and that sort of thing. And I was noticing when I was getting in an elevator, I'd immediately open Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, this is awkward. This is weird. I'm just going to like disengage for a minute.
Yeah.
And I started realizing if I cannot last 20 seconds without feeling like I need to escape to some sort of an outlet that's like that relieves me of boredom, essentially, then there's a problem. And a few years ago, I went and I spent 3 months in a little tiny village in the middle of the jungle in Belize, and I felt so incredibly stressed for probably 2 weeks because we didn't have internet access half the time, and I was just like, "What? I feel like I need something." You know what I mean? I need to be busy. I need to be doing something. And it was like, no, you don't. You need to take a step back. And I started realizing, man, this thing's really affecting me.
Detox.
And since then, I've really tried to put a limit on like how much time I spend on social media, how much time I spend watching TV, that sort of thing, because it really does affect you, and it affects the way that you engage with the world around you.
For sure. When I take that 24 hours off, it's so funny. I was sitting in line at the grocery store or something, and where was I? Oh no, we were doing pictures for my daughter for softball. Not important. Who cares? Nobody cares. But I was in line with a bunch of people, and I didn't have my phone, and I started like looking around, and I'm like, everybody's on their phone. And I'm like, I'm the weirdo without anything to do. And everyone started looking at me like, what is this guy doing? Like, why is he so observant of the world around him? You know, and I'm like, I felt so like, I don't know. And so I'm just walking around, just paying attention to architecture, just looking at the sky. And I read this study that said some of our best creative moments, which of course I won't go into creativity. I love talking about creativity too.
Next time.
Next time.
Next time.
But some of our best creative moments happen out of boredom. Like some of the greatest creative things that happen in our mind is when we sit back. I mean, as a kid, like I think about as a kid, I didn't have a phone when I was a kid. So I'd sit in my backyard and I would pretend I was a pirate or something, or I would dig a hole. I grew up in Tucson without a pool, so I'd dig a hole and fill it with water like it was a pool. And just things like that would come to me, and I would build things and I would learn how things worked. And it's because I was bored. I let myself get bored. And even your like self-control on the elevator, like even when you can have little wins like that, like right now I'm bored and I'm not going to open up my phone. And I'm going to just fight myself just for a little bit. And it's like what David talked about with Sabbath being for resistance.
Yeah.
Resistance is huge. Like pushing back and going, you know what? I'm going to let myself be bored a little bit right now, or I'm going to push that aside and read a book or build something. That was that quote I loved that I found, that Jewish proverb that says, if you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. And if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. And I find that so much, like you've been to my backyard, you know, like, and actually this is a table that I built, ironically, that we're having a conversation on, because I realized this week, like that's how I rest. I have to stop trying to think about things. If I read books, that becomes work for me too. I start highlighting things and going, oh, I should post that on Proverbs Daily. Like, no, that's work for me. I need to set that aside and go, you know what I really need to do is run to Home Depot, grab some wood, build something for my kids. And I find at the end of the day, I'm exhausted physically, but mentally my brain has recharged too, you know?
Yeah.
So finding those sort of things is crucial.
Totally. And we talked about that a lot in the last episode where we were trying to define, like, what does Sabbath actually look like? And I think rather than taking it to a weird legalistic place, we were trying to ask ourselves questions. And I was talking to Mark and Alec about that. Is it rest and is it worship? And that's kind of the criteria we landed on of trying to determine what's Sabbath and what's not. Yeah. And for you, like, because you work with your brain all week, you know, doing manual labor may be a form of rest for you. But for someone in the exact opposite position, you know what I mean? Maybe sitting and reading a book or something like that's going to be the most restful thing that they can do. Yeah. And I think it doesn't really matter as long as at the end of the day, you have enough self-awareness to understand like what is actually giving my soul the nutrients that it needs.
Absolutely.
And I think that we just don't understand how to do that. As a Western society, we haven't quite figured out that it's okay to step back and the world's going to keep turning. It's not dependent upon us. And I like how you brought up that idea of resistance, because it is countercultural to be the one guy in the coffee shop not on his phone and just looking around like a weirdo. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's a small step in the right direction of understanding that we're called to a life that is countercultural. And I think in the ancient Near East, there's always been a judgment on the Jewish people for they're the ones who are taking the day off. You know what I mean? And
They're the weirdos.
They're the weirdos
doing it. Yeah.
But I mean, here we are, and we're looking at science, and it's saying we need a 24-hour break in our week. But more than that, I think we need to understand how to do that on a daily basis, because I don't think once a week is going to cut it.
No. It's like this habit. You have to get into that habit. And introspection is really hard when you're paying attention to everyone else, you know? Mm-hmm. So, like, it's hard to go, how do I find rest when you're spending all of your free time, like we talked about this yesterday, comparing yourself to people on social media. Mm-hmm. Like, comparison is exhausting. You can scroll through and go, I could be a much better husband, or I should be a much better follower of Jesus. You find people, you're like, oh my gosh, they're selling everything and moving to, South America. What am I doing with my life? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to pay attention to the rhythms of your life and pay attention to what God's saying to you when all of your attention is on everybody else. And it's easy. You avoid boredom. And that's why I said yesterday, for me, the real linchpin idea yesterday was the world is offering distraction, but Jesus is offering rest. And I don't care if you're a Christian or not a Christian, you're in this sort of frantic pace of life. And it's one of those things that if, as a Christian, we can start looking different than everybody else, and instead of everyone coming to us and going, how's your week? And we go, oh, it's busy, it's insane, like everyone else. We start to go, I'm doing pretty good. I'm feeling healthy. Not just physically, but emotionally. I'm feeling healthy spiritually. Like, that is something that's going to speak volumes to the world around us. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I feel brand new in the season, like this renewed resolve to be like, I want to live differently. I don't want to be the guy that says I'm tired all the time. I don't want to be the guy that says I'm exhausted all the time. But I want to say I'm rested, but I want to be honest too. I don't want to be like religious about it and go, oh, I feel great, and on the inside I'm dying, I want there to be this genuine, true rest that comes into my life. And you don't get that without time with Jesus and time to be bored and think a little bit about how you're feeling,
Yeah. I mean, Ryan, you're one of the maybe busiest people I know in terms of you have a lot of responsibilities. You've got a tour that you're managing. You're writing multiple books. You're overseeing all the creative process here at Living Streams. And so how have you been able to implement rest in your life to an extent that you actually feel like you're able to stay healthy when you've got so many responsibilities? I mean, you were just telling me right before we went on the podcast that you've got 50 pages to write on your book before tomorrow.
Well, I'm in the editing phase, which is, I wish I was writing. Editing is so much harder for me. But it is, I do think I've always had a habit of taking into account my day and going, okay, how am I spending my time? And I've had people go, man, how do you have time to write the book? And what's funny is when I first started writing the book, it was actually very restful for me, because I love this, like we were talking about it just before we went live here. Like, I love taking apart life a little bit and analyzing it. And that's writing is really all that, like had this story that happened in my life. This is what I learned. This is what I realized in the middle of it. And so there's a season where sometimes work and rest get blurry for me. So like that was very therapeutic for me. I got to spit out a bunch of stuff. Now I'm in the editing phase. This is firmly work. Like, I get no recharge when I'm done. I'm exhausted when I'm done. It is work. And I think paying attention to yourself, paying attention to those rhythms, but like I said, taking that 24 hours to shut down. And even we've talked a little bit about Outcry, and I actually just did a podcast about Outcry and having to cancel the last tour, and the emotions that went along with that. One of the great things that came on the backside of it, as I started to realize how it was this background noise of stress in my life, and once it was gone, it was painful that it was gone, but I was like, thank you, God, because I was aware now I've been operating stressfully,
Yeah, absolutely.
And this idea that the world relies on you, like if you're not engaged, that somehow everything's going to blow up. Those are these like base beliefs that we have to start tackling in our lives. Like, you can create space and still be stressed all day long if you believe like I'm disconnecting, but everybody's going to be so mad at me when I reconnect. That makes the disconnect, like it just makes it null and void to me. Like, you're stressed the whole time, and you have to do that sort of that groundwork, that heart level stuff of going, the world doesn't rely on me. I can disconnect for a little bit. If somebody's mad at me because I didn't get back to them, that's okay. My self-worth does not rise and fall on other people's opinions. These are like deep groundwork things that for me in my life, I feel like the Lord's kind of given me a real great insight in and a great like gut instinct about a little bit more. And with this book, even writing it, I've been kind of unpacking like what do I like? How do I compartmentalize? But all of those things, I mean, I think for every person it looks different. It really does. And for me, I've spent even when I was in a season where like I wasn't sleeping real great, and sleep is everything in rest. Like you need sleep to have good rest. And it's like the foundational thing. And I would wake up at 2 a.m. and start thinking about stuff. And I'd be like, maybe I need to take melatonin, or maybe I need to just like watch TV, or like I tried everything, and I'd wake up and my brain was just going at 2 a.m. And one night I decided, you know, when I wake up at 2 a.m., I'm going to write. And that was like, I was in the middle of writing the book, but there wasn't a lot of stress around it. But I realized if my brain's active anyway, I might as well just start spitting words out on a page, you know. And I would write from like 2 to 3:30 in the morning, and then I would get real tired and I would go to bed. And there's a surprising amount of this last book that I wrote probably around 2 to 4 in the morning, you know. And that was just a season where that was restful for me. Right now, if I woke up at 2 in the morning, I'm not going to jump to editing my book because that's actually really stressful to me right now, you know. So you got to pay attention to yourself. You have to pay attention to what the Lord's saying to you. You need to make sure that you're having real, genuine time with the Lord, that He's giving you revelation, fresh insights from Him, because ultimately that's that power source. That's it. Like, I don't know what else to do. I'm so tired. I've tried everything to rest. And ultimately, when you really, really get some time with the Lord, He's the one that recharges. He's the one that brings new revelation. He's the one that brings that real clear introspection of, Ryan, you've been diving into this for a while, and it's actually really starting to hurt you. You need to pull back, and you need to go into this, you know. So super long answer to a short question.
No, that's good. So good, Ryan. I think last podcast there was another thing that we dove into a little bit that I would like to talk about, and it's this idea in Hebrews 3 and 4 where it talks about how Israel was unable to enter into the rest, the promise of rest, because of their unbelief. And
There's
I think
you were for the people of God,
totally. And you were just touching on that exact same point, because there is an element of faith that's involved in,
for sure.
If I'm not going to be the one who labors, but I'm allow the Lord to like take me into that place of rest by trusting in His faithfulness. And I think that it's really, really hard for us who are constantly going to be able to disengage enough to just believe that, okay, it's going to be okay, and I'm going to allow God to be the author and perfecter of my faith. And I think that you touch on a great point where you're saying, I'm scrolling through Instagram and I'm seeing this person over here, and there's a temptation to compare and be like, I should be doing more stuff for the Lord. I should be working harder. I should be kind of grinding a little bit more at that ideal. And that's such a big word that we have in our society right now. But I think that the countercultural idea is stepping back and saying, okay, you know, I need to trust that the Lord's got me. He's going to take me into the place that I need to be. And I'm curious to know, there's got to be a temptation for you once Outcry was kind of removed from your life to immediately fill that with a million other things.
Yes. Yeah. We were flying to Portland when I got the news, and I was sitting with David Stockton. We were getting ready to fly to Portland, and him and I processed a little bit, and then we processed on the Uber ride, you know, to our Airbnb and all that. And I was like, I think I'm doing okay. I think I'm fine. You know, like I had told myself, like, I think I'm good. Like, and I had done the heart checks of like, am I wrapping too much identity around it? You don't really know if you've wrapped too much identity around it until it's pulled from you. Like that's the real moment where you're like, oh, youch. I guess I did have more identity wrapped around that than I thought. And I had one of those moments. And Mark and David were doing something, and I was like, I'm going to go to this cool coffee shop that I saw, which is Portland. There's cool coffee shops everywhere.
Awesome.
I'm going to go up to the coffee shop. I'm just going to like pray a little bit, have a little space. Maybe I'll read, you know. And I got my coffee, sat down, and within 2 minutes, I was texting everybody that I could think of to be on my podcast, which is just dumb. Like I'm texting everybody that's ever been on Outcry, you know. And I realized that was me like grasping for something. I'm like, okay, if that's not going to be going on, I'm going to fill it with this. And again, that self-awareness of like, okay, no, I'm not going to do that, you know. But that faith element is huge, because then it really ultimately everything ties back to identity. Like, where am I anchoring my identity to? And we have anchor points for our identity all over the place. I'm a husband, I'm a parent, you know, whatever. But there's occasionally anchors that we throw into things that we shouldn't. And something like outcry, what you do, your job, that's not your anchor. If that's your main anchor and you lose your job, now you don't know who you are. And you have to anchor into what God says about you. And there's global things that God says about you, like you're a son of God. You are, and Jay loves to use the imagery from Hebrews of being a priest. There's imagery of saying we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So there's all these things that God says about you globally. But when you have relationship with the Holy Spirit, you start to learn individual things too. Like, this is who I am. This is what God says about me, because there's nobody else on earth like me. Without that anchor point, you don't get into that Matthew 11 like we were talking about yesterday. I love the way the Message puts it. You'll find real rest. You'll find the unforced rhythms of grace. That is the thing that I'm like, we are all hungry for that unforced rhythm. And you dive into Hebrews. I love that, and we're talking a lot about that, me and David, and going, there is rest for the people of God when we set our faith back into God. There is that rest when you're like, I'm not going to worry about what everyone else is doing on Instagram, or I'm going to read everyone else's Instagram knowing that this is not their real life, you know? Like I was saying, my Instagram's got a lot of highlights. I did talk about my dog dying. I guess that was like a low point. But for the most part, I'm like, I talk about good stuff on Instagram. What you won't hear me say is like, oh, me and Toby got in a big fight the other day or whatever, or we're still dealing with whatever. Like, there's real life that is not going to make it on social media. We all know that it's not going to. There's this kind of unsaid rule that it's like, it's a little too far or a little too uncomfortable or a little awkward, you know. And you have to read Instagram for what it is. It's like that highlight reel. And when you get into that comparison, when you lose your anchor point in what God says about you, it becomes exhausting. You'll never find a place to rest because you don't know what God's saying to you. You're not aware of what he's saying to you at this season. You're not aware of what he says about you in the Bible. Like, there are these anchor points that we have to lock into. And that's why I said I love that verse I found this week in it's Psalms 116:7, I think. And it's return to rest my soul, like that, like talking to yourself sort of language, which I just love. For the Lord has been good to you. So you start with thankfulness. And that's that, like, you cannot have rest without thanksgiving. Like, you can't be unthankful about everything in your life and compare it to everything on Instagram and find rest.
Totally.
Like, they won't fit in the same space. So you have to be able to pause and go, I'm so thankful for what you've done. I'm so thankful for who I am. I'm so thankful for the place that you have me right now. And out of that place, then you can walk in rest.
That's so good.
So.
Yeah, that's a lot to digest right there. I mean, it's so good. You were just in Portland, and you were visiting Bridgetown Church, and their pastor John Mark Comer has an amazing teaching on work and rest, and I think that he really roots it in that Genesis 1 reality that we are made in the image of God, and that means that the things that we see God doing, we're supposed to imitate. You know, we're imitators of Christ. And so we see God working for 6 days and then resting for a day. And so that's an integral part of our identity. That, I mean, this isn't something you have to really necessarily have a clear word from the Lord on. You can see this clearly portrayed in Scripture. And I think that a lot of us, we like to identify with those 6 days of work because it makes us feel important. You know what I mean? I've got these things that I'm going after, and I'm advancing the kingdom of God, especially for those of us in ministry. It's incredibly difficult.
Enneagram 3s. Check. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Totally. And then, but it's that other component of, like, obviously God didn't need rest in terms of, like, he's all powerful, doesn't need to recharge, but he demonstrated something for us that is inherently human, and that is this idea of thankfulness, of sitting back and saying it's good. And I think that I love that God demonstrates that, because I really do believe that for 6 days we labor, and on that seventh day we can look back and just be content. And I think I love the way that Apostle Paul says it. He's like, you know, I've learned the secret of contentment. I've learned how to be thankful with little and with much. And I think that that's really the key to entering into a place of rest, because without that element of thanksgiving, it's just, I'm just watching the clock like, all right, when can I start working again?
Yes.
Instead of really enjoying the fruits that God's bearing in our lives.
Yes. Yeah. That's like the book that Abraham Herschel, I can't remember his last name. Yeah.
Abraham Joshua Heschel.
There it is.
So,
when he's like, I am, like God calls us to labor for 6 days, to dominate the earth. Like there's like this idea of like, I'm going to take this like this raw creation in front of me, and I'm going to labor to make something new out of it. Yeah. And that's what we do 6 days a week. I love when David goes, some of you need to work up to 6 days a week.
Yeah, exactly.
But 6 days a week, like we are called to work really hard and dig in but on the seventh day, we're called to dominate self, which I think is so interesting when he uses that language. It's like we have to, like David says, the resistance, we have to create that space, and that's what separates us from everybody else in the world. Following God, looking at his example and going, okay, you showed us rest, we're going to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it all comes down to, is rest is found in the places we're able to kind of disconnect from this reality that the world is constantly putting in front of us, especially as Western Christians. It's our identity is so tied up in what we can produce. Yeah. And I don't think that I think that, especially in that book, Garden City, John Mark Comer really does dive into the fact that work is really important. And I don't think that we should completely disregard that, because I think a lot of Christians do, where they're just like, what I do doesn't really matter. It does. It does. So connected to who you are as a human being.
Yes.
But equally so is rest.
Yes.
And I think you kind of walk that line where it's like, and I love that we're in this series called The Other Hours, because we're really talking about the fact that God doesn't really want to make you a good Christian just on Sundays. He wants to teach you how to redeem the hours that you've got that are, you got 168 hours in a week, 167 about of those you're not spending in church. Yeah. And so, but those hours are hours of work and rest, and we're having to find that balance of understanding. And I think what you're talking about with disconnecting from technology and understanding what that does to you is so vitally important, because that's just not something we talk about very often.
No. Yeah, and I think when you start to look at, it's so funny, again, Enneagram 3, like I want to be so productive.
Right.
And at the same time, I realize, and I've come to understand, when I could just let myself not be productive and go, today I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to waste time. Like as an Enneagram 3, I'm like, it hurts to even just say that. And sometimes you have to let yourself do that. Go, okay, I'm going to let myself shut down. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to go hang out and swim in the pool for a little while, like whatever it is. And the older you get, I think the harder it is for you to like let yourself do that. The more the gravity of the world pulls you into this like machine where you can never stop producing. But then you find yourself more productive on the other side. Like that's a weird like catch-22 of it. It's like, okay, if you get really good at rest and you really do find out what recharges you, and you spend your time not comparing yourself to other people and pouring into your family and being aware of what's going on, you find yourself a lot more productive those other 6 days.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, we have to understand, like, that's not the point.
That's not the point.
You know what I mean? Like, yes, productivity is great. And I think that we can kind of get in that mindset where it's like, I'm only resting so that I can get better at work. And it's like, we got to get away from that mindset, because, I mean, we're talking about Enneagram, and I'm a 1. So, you know what I mean? I've constantly got this urge to, like, I've got to be improving. I've got to be growing myself. You know what I mean? And I think there is a place for finding, I mean, yes, we dominate ourselves on the Sabbath. We're learning how to increase that interior life. You know what I mean?
Yes, for sure.
But at the same time, it is about faith. And that for me, my greatest struggle is on the Sabbath, I want to dig in and be like, all right, what's all the things that are wrong with me? Let's fix those right now. Yeah. And my struggle is always being like, all right, Lord, you are the one who's going to bring about the transformation. You're the one who's going to bring about bearing fruit. A tree cannot bear fruit by itself. It can't like muster up enough strength in order to do that. It's a process. You know,
as a one, you need to rest from self-improvement.
Exactly.
Like I need to rest from trying to make myself. Well, I love when David said a couple weeks ago, as a father, he's got to rest in terms of trying to make his kids better, which I struggle with all the time. Like, kids, you're fighting. Let me sit you down and tell you why that's wrong. and taking a rest from that and being like, okay, I'm not going to improve anybody today. You know,
absolutely.
I'm going to spend some time with God, spend some time with my family, and really be engaged. You
totally.
know?
And self-awareness is really so important in that.
Yeah.
You have to know what is rest for you, how to achieve that. And I think, like, obviously we can talk about some very general principles as far as like 24 hours of rest is awesome. You know what I mean? But you got to figure out how to use that. And that's bringing it all the way back around. Like, if you've still got your cell phone on and you're like engaging with the world, even when you're trying to take a quiet time or a time away, it's just not going to work.
Yes.
And so I think that for me, I've been analyzing kind of the way that I spend my time and the amount of time that I spend on technology and how it affects me. And I do think that that's really the challenge that I kind of walked away from with your sermon was you got to understand how to achieve a deep level of rest, because there is surface level rest. You know what I mean? And we don't want that. I think God really does want us to live an abundant life. And a part of that is like really understanding the depths of the rest that he has for us.
For sure.
So
for sure.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm so glad that you're on the show today. This has been so much fun. I'm excited for next time. We can talk about creativity.
Thanks, Brandon. We are going to dive into so much more.
It's going to be really good.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, man. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching the Living Streams podcast. Make sure to subscribe. Check out all future upcoming content, like maybe another podcast with Ryan Romeo in the future. So make sure to stay tuned to check those things out. Have a good one.
This has been a production of Living Streams Church in Phoenix, Arizona. If you like what you heard, please visit us at livingstreams.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.